NRI Wellness brings you the latest health and nutrition information, creates customized nutrition programs, and walks you through the process to ensure your success.
Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, good night, wherever you are in the world. And welcome to another dynamic episode of the 10 Dimensions of Wellness. I am your host, Cammie Red, the owner of NRI Wellness. This is going to be another great episode. I've been actually looking forward to this guest coming on for a while. Today we have the headache nutritionist, Susannah Juteau. So, Susannah, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us how you got to this point. What made you decide to be a headache nutritionist? What's your personal wellness journey?
Sure. Okay. Well, it's been quite the journey, as we all have very unique stories to ourselves, and I always love hearing about everyone as well. So my journey, well, it really starts with education, where I did my undergrad in neuroscience, and then I did a graduate degree in nutrition and a graduate diploma in to become a registered dietitian. And then I worked in the community for a long time, doing group programs. And at a certain point, I hit my head when I was skiing, and all of a sudden started getting some really bad headaches that just kept getting worse and worse every day. So when I went to the doctor, they just said, "Oh, well, you hit your head. It must be a concussion." And I said, "Well, no, this isn't a concussion," because I was actually fine for a couple of days before the symptoms started. And the fact that they were getting worse instead of better is a red flag for it not being a concussion. So I eventually convinced them to allow me to have an MRI, and they found a brain tumor pushing on my brainstem. It was the size of a ping pong ball, and of course the brainstem is the center of life. So I was rushed into surgery, and the doctors, or my neuroscientist, was like, "Don't worry, like the headaches that you're experiencing, those will all go away after the surgery, because it's because of this tumor that's pushing on really all parts of the brain." And but then after surgery, I had a long recovery period, and the headaches never went away. If anything, they got worse. And with the headaches, I often had migraine symptoms as well. So where the headaches just went into the nth degree and I wouldn't be able to function at all. So that was also quite common, to have the migraine symptoms along with the daily chronic headaches. And when it came to returning to work, it was just this really difficult struggle of working and then having to take time off, and just never feeling like myself. I always had brain fog. I had those constant daily headaches every day, and just couldn't function. And I know a lot of people can relate that, especially anyone who does deal with migraine disabilities, that you just aren't yourself, and you're hoping to find a solution. So you go from doctor to doctor, looking for what is the root cause of this. And my doctors would just say, "You know what? We don't know why this is happening. It should be cured by now." And they would just give me another medication to try, like try this and try this. And after a few years of this going back and forth, I really, by this point, I had been really paying attention to my nutrition as much as possible, and making sure that my meals were balanced and eating all the time as they recommend. All migraine specialists recommend that you eat every 3 to 4 hours to keep your blood sugars high. And so I was keeping a real track of my nutrition and what food triggers could have been adding to the migraines. And there was just I still had to take the medication all day. So I felt like there had to be a solution out there. So because I wasn't getting the answers from the doctors as I wanted, I decided to just like look into things myself as much as possible and really dive into the research. And at the same time, intermittent fasting was becoming really popular. So, and it's popular as a weight loss method. So I wasn't interested. But as more and more people as clients came to ask me about it, I said, okay, well, I better start looking into this research. And there I found a lot of anecdotal evidence that longer terms of fasting, therapeutic fasting, could really help with my headaches. And so I implemented it myself, and have been off medications ever since. And now I teach people really to focus on where to focus for their nutrition and what are the main migraine triggers, and those who are ready to heal their bodies even further to get off medication, then we look at therapeutic fasting on top of it as well. So that's kind of my background in a nutshell.
Wow, you've been through quite a bit. I mean, well, I'm not going to put emphasis on it as if it's been just a debilitating situation, but to bring you to this point, to actually help you find your purpose, it's been quite a wellness journey for you. You actually had to go through all of this, so it brought you to that point. What are some of the things that you've learned throughout this process about yourself, so to speak, that you think might help others?
Yeah, oh my gosh. I'm sure if I sat down and wrote things, I would come up with so many answers. But really, one of the biggest ones that stands out is to not be a lone wolf. Because I think our society teaches us from a young age that it's not okay to feel pain, and to describe pain to others is putting them in an awkward position. Is kind of what we're taught from a young age. We don't want to see people cry. We don't want to see people in pain, and we don't know what to do to help others, or so as a result, I never reached out for help. During all of this journey, I just always pretended the best I could. I would always, return to work, and then of course my manager knew what was going on and everything, but in terms of reaching out to friends and family and to say like, oh, I'd love some extra meals, or I could use some support here, or even just reaching out and saying, how are you doing today, makes a huge difference. And there's so many illnesses and pain that is just so invisible that we really don't understand what other people are going through. So the biggest journey that I went through is kind of that whole mindset journey of, one, that I can reach out to others, but also to not let it wane on my own confidence, and to feel like I was a failure, because that was a big part of things, is that feeling of, there's the hopelessness and the helplessness that comes through going to doctors and not getting answers. But there's then that whole other component that you think you're doing something wrong, and that you're doing something responsible, or you're responsible for your symptoms. And that becomes even more prominent in the work that I do now as a headache nutritionist, is that so many people kind of come to me and say, I've tried every food and nothing works. And it's just, so many doctors say, oh, cut out this list of headache triggers, and it doesn't necessarily reflect what the individual needs to do. And we're more like at the typical like medical community level, we're treated more as a blanket, where everyone who suffers with migraine is treated kind of the same way. But really, when you look at it at an individual level, there's a lot more that can be done in terms of food, rather than just cutting out the major triggers, although that's of course a part of it as well. Some people aren't aware that food has anything to do with it at all.
You are absolutely right, but some people don't get how much food has a lot to do with a lot of our ailments or a lot of things that we face. So let me ask you this: you talked about the medical industry or some of the things that you faced. One of the things that you discussed was treating the surface, not the root issues. What do you think are some things that your doctors might have misunderstood about you, or some ways that you were trying to get them to understand what you were going through as opposed to just treating the surface issues?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think they're just bombarded by, so many doctors. I don't blame them at all, because when you go through school, that's how you're taught. You're taught to treat the symptoms, not the root cause. And then root cause is never obvious, right? You have to dig and try things. And when you're meeting with doctors, you usually have a 15-minute visit. Some people are lucky to have a bit longer than that, but you can't actually work with the client at the same level that some other health professionals can, where you can really dig into their 5-day food record. You could run certain tests that are less familiar in the medical community, where it's not just, a typical blood test of normal amounts, looking into food diaries for nutrient levels, and like that whole nutrition approach. Most medical doctors usually have like one course, not even a course, like one lesson when they're being taught. So I really believe that everyone should approach different medical practitioners for different reasons. And the reality is, for a lot of medical doctors, the approach that's a great approach for medications, and maybe for some referrals and some ideas of some other things. I think that's what a lot of doctors can do. But when you're looking deeper into the nutrition issues, you should be working with a dietitian for that.
Awesome. Thank you for that information. So what are some of the common myths that you dispel around the headaches and the things that people should actually be eating, or what they shouldn't be eating, or when they should be eating? What are some common myths that you hear?
Okay, so there's so many. Number one that's popping into mind is around caffeine, because the thing with caffeine and headaches is that it's like a double-edged sword, or maybe not quite sword, because it's good in some ways and really bad in others. So what happens with caffeine is that caffeine can be very helpful when you have a headache or when you have a migraine. It helps you get past those symptoms sooner. But then caffeine also is a huge migraine trigger food. So a lot of people respond to that saying, oh, coffee helps me every day and it helps me prevent my headaches. But in the long run, it's doing quite the opposite, and that's been well shown in research. So that's kind of the biggest, one of the biggest food triggers, and the one I get the most resistance about, because we are like a very caffeine focused nation, is that everyone wants their morning coffee, and it's very hard to give up. And on top of that is that when you give up a daily caffeine, you stimulate headaches, right? So there's a good 2-week period of getting off that caffeine that can be quite difficult. And then of course there's caffeine hidden in things, but usually I find just cutting out the coffee or the green tea, the ones that, or the black tea, like anything that has more caffeine in it is sufficient. Something like chocolate doesn't have as much caffeine in it. So that's one big myth, if you will, is that a lot of people think that they're fine keeping the caffeine in, when really, if you cut it out in the long run, you're much better off.
Yeah, so a lot of people are getting that temporary quick fix that caffeine does for the headache, but then what they don't realize is in the long run, that caffeine buildup is actually triggering the headache to be more intense than what it usually would be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's causing those rebound headaches. And so do a lot of medications too. That's another thing that a lot of people don't realize, is that when you take a medication more than it's supposed to, then you cause rebound headaches. And if you're always, another thing that's aligned with that is that if you're always reducing your pain, then you have to take that much more medication to cover, you just become pain intolerant as well. So that's a big one as well. Now, the biggest myth that I come across, because I am very think outside of the box, I guess is maybe the best way to put it, when it comes in terms of headache nutrition, is the recommendation to eat every 3 to 4 hours. So when pretty much all neurologists will give this recommendation, and to me it's old recommendations, because if you're constantly eating all day, you're constantly glucose reliant. And there's a lot of studies now that are showing that anyone who deals with migraine doesn't process glucose in the same way, especially during an attack, where it's called glucose dysregulation. So the glucose can't enter the cells as well as it could or should. And for that reason, we want to rely on other fuels. And when we're eating all the time, we're never giving our gut rest. We're never allowing our bodies to use up liver glycogen. And we're never getting into a point where we can use ketones as fuel. So I'm a big believer of having 2 forms of fuel, where we always, I mean, everyone uses glucose as fuel, but if we're using glucose as fuel 100% of the time, then yes, we will feel hangry if we don't eat every 3 to 4 hours. But once you get past that period and get used to using up liver glycogen, then we can use ketones as fuel as well. So that during a migraine attack, our body is just used to using ketones as well. And that's what alleviates the symptoms that we experience.
Wow. So breaking that down, listening to you talk, I understood exactly what you were saying in layman's terms. Someone who isn't familiar with the terms glucose, liver glycogens, or ketones, tell them exactly what that means so that they'll understand how to help themselves just on a surface level, just to help themselves.
Yeah, right. So glucose is what most forms of food get broken down into glucose in our gut. So any carbohydrates get broken down into glucose. Even meats have some glucose in there, but especially carbohydrate sources. So so then that's the glucose. And then when we're eating, the body circulates all of that glucose to go to all of the different cells in the body and fuel those cells so that they can keep operating and having energy. And then when our body no longer needs more glucose, then we store it as backup fuel, and we store that in our liver. And that's the liver glycogen. And so that, when we're doing exercise or in between meals, then we can rely on that liver glycogen to keep giving us fuel. And so what happens with ketones is that ketones never get released if we're always eating regularly. So if we give our body periods of gut rest, then our body isn't focused on digesting food during that time and can instead use up liver glycogen. And once liver glycogen is used up, it reaches into fat stores. And when fat stores are broken down, it releases ketones. So it allows our body to use ketones as fuel instead of glucose all the time. So it's nice to be able to, it's almost like 2 different doors into the cell. You can use the glucose door, you can use the ketone door. Often we can use both at the same time, but if you're eating throughout the whole day, and there's a lot of research showing that most people eat for 16 hours of the day in the long run, then you're just never giving your body that time to heal except while you're sleeping. And an 8-hour sleep period is not enough to get into that cellular healing, especially because while we're sleeping, everything slows down. So I always suggest everyone starts with at least 12 hours of gut rest every day, and then can kind of build up from there once they're, you know, kind of used to that. And it's always really good to eat following the circadian rhythms. So the circadian rhythms is when it's light outside, you eat, but when it's dark outside, you stop eating. So that's kind of the best way to do it. So it's great to stop eating at 7 p.m. and then you can have your breakfast at 7 a.m. And that gives you 12 hours of gut rest, but you're also only eating during the light hours.
So, Susannah, tell us about some of the challenges that you have faced with your clients as a headache nutritionist. Explain to us what that actually looks like. When clients come to see you, what are some of the things that you tell them they need to do as a way to prevent or heal themselves?
Yeah, so I think so often people come with the idea that there's one thing that they're doing wrong, and it's just like this detective work to find what that one thing is. But the way I like to describe it is as a headache trigger bucket. So if you imagine different size buckets, so one really small, a medium sized one, and a really large one. If you have a very large headache trigger bucket, it means you can put all kinds of things in there, and it takes a while to fill up. So it could be environmental toxins going in there, could be stress, poor sleep, alcohol, poor diet, poor balanced meals, all going into that headache trigger bucket. And if you have a large bucket, then you still won't get a headache, or not very often. For a lot of those people, they might only get a headache if they were to drink too much. And then there's like those who get headaches once in a while, but on a more regular basis and not really sure what it's coming from. That's usually kind of a medium headache trigger bucket, where there's just as many triggers that go into it, but you have a bit more room so that you're not getting a headache every day. And then there's the migraine population, or the chronic headache population, who has a much smaller headache trigger bucket, and that fills up really quickly. So it fills up with many different types of triggers. There's a ton of different food triggers, but then there's all those other triggers that I mentioned as well. So often people think that it's just like one food that they need to pinpoint, or that it's like just one thing in their life that they're doing wrong. And wrong is the wrong way to put it, because we all have triggers. Like, no matter what, we all have these trigger buckets, and they all fill up. So things like, so right now I'm in California, and there's awful forest fires, and the air is super toxic. So there's all this plastic in the air. So if I walk outside, I will instantly get a headache. Just watering the plants for 5 minutes leads me to get a headache. And so that's because I have a small headache trigger bucket, and I always have to make sure to empty it. So that's what therapeutic fasting comes in, is to help empty the bucket, but also watching my nutrition and my, like, making sure that my meals are very balanced. So it's much more like looking at it at a more holistic level, that it's not one thing. It's not that you're doing food wrong, or that you're doing that your sleep is wrong. It's really like, if you have poor sleep, if you have a really stressful day, and you ate French fries and chicken fingers for supper, then those three things all add up together to fill up the headache trigger bucket. And depending on what you're prone to, either that chronic headache that's there daily, or if you've really filled up your trigger bucket and like surpassed the trigger bucket even, then that will initiate a migraine. So it's all these everything that adds together. So I look at things from more the nutritional standpoint, but also the holistic, like, what is the lifestyle? What are some other things we can look at? Because say if someone's regularly sleeping 6 hours a night, then that's going to be a huge component to their migraine. But in terms of looking at food triggers, So food triggers, we want to make sure that everyone is eating very balanced meals. And what I mean by that is thinking, say a supper meal, thinking of your plate and dividing it mentally. So half your plate should be vegetables, 2 different vegetables, a quarter of your plate being a protein, and then a quarter of your plate being a carbohydrate source, but preferably grains or something with a lot of fiber in it. And that's a balanced meal. Now, especially in the headache population, because we're told, as I mentioned, to eat every 3 to 4 hours, is that there's a lot of snacking going on, a lot of grazing happening. And what happens with the grazing and the snacking is that it's usually not a balanced meal. Or so it might be, okay, I'm gonna, eat some pumpkin seeds right now. And then the next thing, I'm gonna have a piece of toast with some butter on it. And it's just these little things, some crackers, all these little things, but because they're on their own, something like crackers, that would be digested very quickly in the body, cause a glucose spike because it's broken down into glucose right away. And that glucose spike is makes you very prone to getting a headache. So when I'm looking at people's diet, we're looking at the whole day, the whole week, and really making sure that all meals and all snacks are very balanced. So making sure there's a protein source and a fiber source if you're having a snack. And then at the meals, making sure there's healthy fats, protein, and fiber at the meals as well. So overall, I'd say that's one of the biggest changes for people, is to make sure that all meals are balanced. Because even as a society, we think of things like, for instance, when I grew up, it was always you eat supper and then you digest your supper and then you have dessert. So, and my family still thinks that way. I'm working very hard to get them to change. But the problem with that is that the dessert is no longer, that's not a balanced meal. So you digest it, cause this glucose spike, and then often people wake up with a headache. So it would be so much better just to have that dessert after your meal and not worry about having room for dessert, because if anything, then you just eat a little bit less dessert, and that's great. But to have it at the same time as a meal is actually way better for the body, because then you're still digesting the protein and the fiber from the meal, and then you've got that dessert on top of it, but that slows down that whole digestion. So kind of looking at things like that, making sure meals are balanced. The next thing that I look at is overall micronutrient intake. Now, macronutrients most people have heard of, because macronutrients are protein, carbs, and fat. So it's very popular to count your macros, but actually what's much more interesting is to count your micros. So micronutrients are things like calcium and iron and magnesium and vitamin B12 and B1 and all of these different vitamins and minerals, that if you're deficient in one of them, it causes this bottleneck where a lot of cellular processes can't go on until it has more of that nutrient. And so if you have a nutrient that you're deficient in, often it doesn't show up on blood tests. Some of them do, some of them don't. But if you're never kind of looking at your macros, and that's where a health professional can really help do that assessment for you. If you're not looking at that at a deeper level, sometimes your headaches can be quite easily fixed by just changing your intake. Some of those nutrients that I find are often very deficient. I mostly work with women, but calcium, for one, is huge, because especially as adults, we tend to not drink milk. A lot of people are lactose intolerant, so don't have any dairy at all, but then aren't looking at those alternate sources for calcium. So if you're cutting out all dairy, then you want to make sure that you're getting it through your vegetables. And some vegetables actually bind to calcium and make it even harder to absorb that calcium. So you really want to make sure that that's a nutrient that you're reaching in other ways. And then another big nutrient for headaches, and research-wise, they found that over 50% of the headache population is deficient in this, and it's magnesium. So magnesium can be reached through food. It's just another one of those that you want to be very on top of. So here I like to say, what are the 5 top sources of magnesium? Because most people, that's not a nutrient that we hear of too often. So magnesium can be found in quite a few foods. We want at least 400 milligrams a day. There isn't an upper limit, which means it's hard to reach toxic levels of magnesium, especially if you're getting it through food. So the number 1 source would be rice bran. Now this isn't popular, but it is, you can find it on Amazon and in some specialty grocery stores. So rice bran is just kind of like a powder, almost like flax powder that you just put in things to, like, as a filler. So rice bran would be number 1. The next source of magnesium would be seaweed. So adding seaweed to your diet. My kids love those little seaweed, what are they called? Little seaweed wafers, basically. So that's another source. And then next would be sunflower seeds and pumpkin seeds and hemp seeds. So a lot of seeds have a lot of magnesium in it. And along with the magnesium, they have so many other nutrients like vitamin E. A lot of the B vitamins can be found in seeds. So having regular seed intake is really powerful as well. And also to note there is that a lot of people think, okay, well, I'll just go out and get a magnesium supplement. But what happens if you're not looking at your diet and making sure that you're getting it through your diet is that if you're taking a whole bunch of supplements, usually our gut can't handle all of those supplements and they don't digest them as well. A lot of in the research, it shows that a lot of people who deal with migraine also deal with gut issues and have leaky gut, which means we don't absorb things quite as well. So especially supplements just aren't absorbed quite as well. So much better to get it through food. You always want to make sure you get it through food, and then you can always top it up with a supplement if you know that you're deficient in something. So those are the main nutrients that I look at. There's of course way more, but those are ones that our audience can kind of think about and really like think, do I get enough calcium in a day? Because as adults, we just kind of forget that that's just as important as when we're kids. Oh, actually, to add to that, so calcium, magnesium, but also vitamin D. Vitamin D is massive because vitamin D absorbs calcium, and then it has quite a significant chain to magnesium as well. And especially during the months of October to April, most places in North America can't absorb vitamin D through the sun. And even if you are in a very sunny location, I mean, I'm located in California, but in those winter months, I'm still covered up and I'm not getting sun exposure. So you want to make sure that you're taking your vitamin D supplements on a regular basis, meaning daily, which is my own problem as well, as I forget to take it daily. But even in the summer months, if you're having a lot of sunscreen or it's so hot outside that you don't really want to go outside, a lot of people need to take it during the summer as well. And that's a really key nutrient to take for headaches.
Let me ask you a question. What are some things that people should avoid when it comes to the headache triggers? I know you mentioned a few earlier, but like, are there foods specifically that people should stay away from that would just cause an immediate flare up with some with a headache or with a migraine?
Yeah, so this is such a tricky area of research because everyone is just so unique. Everyone's so individual as to which foods will cause inflammation in the body. So I love to use this test that's called the mediator release test because it identifies which foods in your body are going through the gut and causing inflammation in the long run. because a lot of times it's foods that we would never anticipate. For instance, one of my clients right now loves salads, and that mediator release test indicated that spinach and lettuce are two huge inflammatory foods for her, and that she needs to cut those out to get control of her inflammation. And once the whole immune system has calmed down, then you can start reintroducing those foods. Now, that's not typical though. Most people can handle lettuce and spinach just fine, but might have something else like carrots that bother them, or lamb chops, or so it's so hard to know. And this is why research just constantly comes to dead ends, saying like, well, we know that food is a big part of the equation, but it's so hard to narrow down when you're looking at a large audience or like a large population group what the food triggers are, because it's so different for everyone. That said, there are still a few like ones that come to the top. As I already mentioned, caffeine is a big one. The next one is alcohol. That pretty much affects everyone. So alcohol, even in low doses, can be a trigger. So say you have a drink with friends tonight, and just one drink, so not enough to have, you know, a hangover or anything. It's quite possible you trigger a headache the next day or even 2 days later. So that's why it's so hard to narrow down what your own food triggers are without a test looking at what's causing inflammation in your body. So caffeine, alcohol, and then the top allergens. So the top allergens are things like peanuts and tree nuts, wheat, dairy, soy. So a lot of those, there's just a larger fraction of the population who, though they don't have an allergy to it, doesn't mean they don't have a sensitivity to it. And those wouldn't be uncovered with an allergy test, because you're not like breaking out in hives or anything like that, but that doesn't mean that your gut is digesting those foods to quite the same degree. So those are kind of like the main food triggers. But if someone was to follow like, there's a popular headache elimination diet out there where you eliminate kind of 100 different foods and then reintroduce them slowly. A lot of people find that very frustrating because some people don't see results at all and then determine that, okay, my migraine is not caused by food, when really something like spinach or lettuce, like in my client's point of view, is that's not on that headache elimination diet, but it's eliminating all potentially inflammatory foods. So that's a very common step for people to take, is to try to do it on their own, to do an elimination diet, but it often leads to a lot of frustration.
This is 2-second nutrition tip. Today's tip is challenge yourself to drink at least 6 glasses of water each day. Let me know how it goes. This has been a 2-second nutrition tip. Okay, Susannah, why don't you walk us through your coaching process? Tell us what it's like from your discovery call all the way to the end of your 6-month one-on-one.
Yeah, so I do offer a discovery call. That way everyone can kind of get a sense of whether we get along, mainly whether I can help someone, because everyone has their unique story. Everyone has a unique background, taking different medications or not at all. Some people relate to headaches, some people relate to chronic migraine. There's actually over 100 subtypes of headache and migraine in the, what's it called now? The classification system. So there's so many different areas that people kind of say, oh, I deal with, you know, tension headaches, or I deal with chronic migraine. There's so many different subtypes. So it's great to get on a discovery call to really, so that I get a sense of where you're coming from, how long you've been suffering, what you've tried, and then I see whether I can actually help you or not. So the discovery call is always the first step. And then from the discovery call, once someone decides that once we decide together that we're a right fit for each other, the first session would be, it's a pretty intensive questionnaire. So I have a real like history, and looking at different aspects of life, because with a 6-month program, it's not just a nutrition focus, it's much more an overall process. And so that questionnaire kind of gives us a really great starting point. Then from there, we go into a 5-day food record. And those 5-day food records we will redo at some point, but it's a great starting point to have all kinds of clues of what can be improved. And then all following sessions are mainly like accountability. There's an education piece, of course, but everything about change is much more about accountability. And I think a lot of people don't realize that when they're looking for a health professional, is that, okay, I just want the information and then I'll do it myself. But when I think of myself, the number of programs I've signed up for that, are $100 or something, and then I say, okay, I'll learn it later, and then life gets in the way and you never either attend the courses or you never implement all of the knowledge that you've gained. So that's why I have a 6-month program, because I find the accountability is the biggest component for actual change. And checking in with someone every week about what the challenges are, what we're working on together and what got in the way, that is what really creates a new habit. Studies show that it takes 66 days at a minimum to have a new habit. So when we're talking about nutrition, especially for nutrition for migraine relief, there's a lot of changes that need to be implemented. And if I was just to blurt it out in one session, everyone would leave very overwhelmed. So yeah, we look at things one day at a time, and I always make sure that everyone has 3 declarations or commitments at the end of each session, and that's what their action plan for the week is, to do those 3 declarations, and then we check in the next week and have that follow-up session. So another big component of the 6-month program is that MRT test that I mentioned. So it's the mediator release test, and that's checking. It looks into 140 different foods and 30 different chemicals that are commonly found in foods, and seeing which ones are causing inflammation in our body. And then there's a whole process. It's called the LEAP protocol. So to reintroduce foods into our diet and to open up the diet diversity. Actually, another really important component is to heal the gut. So healing the gut, a lot of that involves increasing food diversity, of course, eliminating those foods that are causing the inflammation in the gut, because then it just causes more and more inflammation as time goes on. And so that's a big component. And then implementing therapeutic fasting to heal the gut as well. So those are kind of the 3 main components. And most people actually see results in the first 8 to 10 days, but the main thing is we want those results to last long periods and for the rest of life, so that no one has to take any medications any longer. So that's why it's a 6-month program.
Awesome. Okay, so tell me about a time that one of your patients actually touched your heart and changed the way you approached your practice.
Oh my gosh, yeah. That's what I love about my work. You know what? Because every single client that you work with, you also learn from. I recently worked with someone who was very connected, mind, body, and spirit, and that was her main goal working with me as well, is to implement kind of the therapeutic fasting approach, because that helps you be that much more connected with mind, body, and spirit. And I just loved the way she approached life and really thought deep into things, like, why is it that I don't like doing exercise, and we'd dive deep into like, where did that stem from? And she was just always willing to go deeper and to think about things, and then implemented everything, like the declarations every week. She was just really excited to put into place, and part of that was some journaling, and we just came to so many different realizations through the journaling that was really exciting. And I think there's just a great growth experience with everyone that I work with, especially because we really get to know each other, especially in my 6-month program, where you get to know their daily habits and really encourage change. And then I myself am encouraged to do my own changes, because we're all on a personal growth journey. So yeah, I love working with clients, and you work with many clients as well. So you know where I'm coming from.
Yes, absolutely. I feel you exactly on that. Let me ask you this. What's something that your program did for one of your clients that you didn't expect it to do?
Well, I mean, that I didn't expect it to do, because there's,
You know, you have so many variants of results, but we always
right.
have in our mind what we expect those results to actually be. And as we know from human nature and from anything else that we've done, things don't go as planned, and we never have the results that we actually expect. What are some surprising results that you have run across just from that you just didn't expect to happen based on, your normal way of doing your practice?
Yeah. So, okay, I thought of 2 different examples that are very different from each other. Because of course, my focus is always like relieving the headaches. So that's a result that I would expect. So one client came with me with a lot of gut issues, and I kind of said to her, I was like, okay, well, I don't feel like I'm not an IBS specialist or anything, so we will be concentrating on the headache aspect of things. And by the end of our time together, she had absolutely no gut issues anymore, and she was like, wow, this is amazing that neither of us really realized how interrelated everything is. So as much as gut health is very important for migraine relief, she had very significant IBS issues, with chronic diarrhea several times during the day. So to see that relief and the effect on her life, because now she didn't feel worried about going out in the community and always having to have a bathroom nearby, or the embarrassment of, even going to a swim party or hanging out with friends. Like, there's a whole different limitations when you have that kind of gut disrest. So that was one client that I was thinking of. And then another one was kind of on a whole different level, was the connection that she built with her family. Because when you're not dealing with migraines all the time and not the worry of triggering a migraine, when you really have control over that aspect, that all of a sudden you can focus on all those things that you want to. And that we say, okay, well, tomorrow I'll feel better, and then I can, go play outside. Or tomorrow, like, there's always that tomorrow, or next year it'll be better. So with her, she actually, when she first met her husband, they used to have a lot of music nights, and so she'd play the piano and he'd play the guitar, and they'd sing together. And it had been like 10 years since she had done that, and her kids had never experienced it. And so with our work together, I kept encouraging her, like, that is a great stress relief and such a perfect way for connection. And as she had more and more control over her headaches, that she felt much more inclined to do something like that. So it just brought this amazing kind of feeling with the family that, music was such a big part of their lives that they just let kind of fall, I wouldn't say fall apart. They still played music here and there, but it wasn't that like Friday night jam session that they used to have when they first got together. So that was a really beautiful, beautiful thing. There's just so many opportunities that open up when you're feeling in control again.
Yeah, people don't think about the total complete wellness that actually comes from healing your body and putting the right things in your body. I was listening to you talk about a patient who had the gut health issues. That's all related. Who knows? Maybe, you healed the gut health and was she taking, I know that's what I meant to ask you, was she taking medication for, her migraines, and possibly didn't even know that what she was dealing with IBS wise was a symptom of, some of her medications that she had been on?
Oh yeah, I see that all the time. It's like all these medications are causing so many other symptoms that you end up choosing a medication that you can tolerate the most. Because especially me, when I was on my medications, caused a lot of weight gain. It caused mental fog. It just caused this intense fatigue that I had to have a nap every afternoon. So there's so many more things that come with medication that it's not just you're choosing one symptom over the other. Really, it's like, okay, well, I have my migraine controlled, but now I have all these other symptoms, and you just never really feel like your true self, and not reaching that potential that you really want to achieve.
Oh, I definitely understand that. We have a program where we work with some of our clients to get them off of their medications, because we found that as we were going out into the community and educating people, a lot of people were taking medications just for the symptoms of the main medication alone. So we were trying to teach people about the proper way of putting the right nutrients, the right foods into your body, so that, first of all, you're preventing the ailment from happening, and you're preventing yourself from, being on the initial medication, which in turns prevents you from being on 5 other medications.
Exactly. Yeah, it's so interrelated, and there's actually it really does come down to nutrition, because there's so many ways we can tweak our diet to, say, release more serotonin, which is the happy hormone, or, we can really tweak our diet to make sure that we're releasing the hormones that we're feeling deficient in. And that's exactly what the medications do, is that they just give that hormone, but we could actually
we can eat that hormone, eat in our diet, a way to either increase or decrease the hormones in our body. We both know, and I'm sure everyone else out there who are experts in the holistic industry understand that, just a minor thing is eating a certain ingredient for a certain amount of days, or, removing a certain thing from your diet can actually make a world of difference in your life. So I definitely get that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Susannah, why don't you tell people where they can find you online, how they can get in touch with you, whether or not they want to book a session with you, where you are on social media, all of that good information.
Yeah, okay. So a few different places. My website is headachenutritionist.com. And then same thing so for my email address, it's always hard to spell, Susannah. So you can just do info@headachenutritionist.com. And then their Instagram, I post at least 5 times a week. So that's also Headache Nutritionist. So it's all, right on theme. And then my business page on Facebook, the same thing. But I do have a Facebook group that's where I do free workshops every Wednesday. So every Wednesday morning I do a workshop, and that's called Hope for Headaches. So those are all great places to find me, or you can just call me too. My number is 669-241-5516.
Okay, you guys. So Susannah has a Facebook group that's called Hope for Headaches, and she also gave you her number, 669-241-5516. So make sure you put that to use. Also, don't forget that we write articles about all of our guests, so you can find Susannah's contact information as well as way more info about her on our website, nriwellness.com. And always don't forget to check out our Facebook group, 10 Dimensions of Wellness. That's where you can find all of our guests. They're signed up as mentors. They're in that group chatting. Some of our guests do courses. Some of our guests just post, but you can always find them there as well. Susannah, I want to thank you so much for being a guest on our show today. This has been another dynamic episode of the 10 Dimensions of Wellness. Susannah, we really appreciate the info that you shared. The headache nutritionist, that's something new for us. So we're grateful for your time.
No problem. Thank you for having me here. It's always fun talking with people and hopefully reaching more people, because so much of the world who suffers with headaches don't realize that there are other solutions other than medication. So
absolutely, like we always say, food is the best medicine for everything. Exactly. You guys, you can listen to this episode as well as our past episodes of the 10 Dimensions of Wellness on Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and so much more. You can also check us out on our YouTube page at NRI Wellness. And once again, don't forget to join our Facebook group, 10 Dimensions of Wellness. This has been another dynamic episode of the 10 Dimensions of Wellness. Thank you so much and have a great night.
NRI Wellness brings you the latest health and nutrition information, creates customized nutrition programs, and walks you through the process to ensure your success.